Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Miljan, Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this another level.
It gets back to just give me the recipe, or better yet, give me the Big Mac deal. They just want the solution handed to them, and it's no, you've got to unfortunately learn how to cook.
It's been 20 months since PMI purchased Disciplined Agile Net Objectives. So Scott, what is one of the biggest things that you've learned since the acquisitions? What's something that stands out?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest thing I've learned is just the wealth of material that PMI already had. We'd already been leveraging ideas out of the PMBOK guide and a few of the other standards in Disciplined Agile because DA is a hybrid. But what was interesting was I hadn't gone into any great detail into some of the actually ANSI standards from PMI, like around governance and portfolio management and good stuff like that. And it's pretty impressive. Every time I initially dug into something, I was always a bit worried, what's going to be in this. And they're all solid. And it was interesting that they're often misinterpreted. And that, including by me, so my expectations going in were a bit off. But then, I looked at the governance standard, for example, and it was solid, like really, really good stuff. I'm not convinced enough people are actually listening to it, and following it. But certainly it's really solid and well aligned with the governance message we already had in DA. So it's just really impressive, and the wealth of the PMI network, the chapters. The chapters are incredible, absolutely incredible how hard they work, and how they're all about helping their members to learn and to improve and get better. I've interacted with maybe 30 chapters so far, since joining PMI, and they've all been impressive. Just absolutely fantastic organizations. It's incredible.
Yeah. No, I can relate to that because I've been part of the PMI community for close to a decade. I have my PMP still. I was actually on the board of directors for PMI chapter here in Portland, Maine, on board of directors. So it gives me a little bit of a different perspective. And I agree, there's a misconception out there in the sense of what PMI is. And there's also a misconception, I think, about Disciplined Agile that people just, and SAFe too. I mean, in a sense, people talk about SAFe, they talk about these things, but they never actually dug deeper to understand. They never took a course, and it's just a perception at the high level. What was interesting to me that, up to December or end of 2018, in some ways, I don't know if you did, but others described Disciplined Agile as a framework. And you've moved away from calling it a framework to calling it a toolkit. Could you maybe elaborate on that? What was the decision behind that, or reasoning behind that decision?
Yeah, so it was, the interesting thing was that we were always being compared to SAFe and Scrum and Less and others. And the comparison was never accurate because where the frameworks tend to be prescriptive, they have one way of doing things, and it's good ways, right? There's a lot of good things to be said about SAFe and Less and Scrum and others, but they tend to have one way of doing things, and there's a lot of rhetoric around it's the art of the possible, and you can tailor it to your own needs and all that sort of stuff. But then they give you exactly zero advice to do that, right? And they certainly give you no advice to improve away and do better than what they have in those frameworks, and nor would that wouldn't make any sense for them to do that, right? Whereas we were taking a completely different approach. We were not prescribing anything. What we were doing in DA is we walk you through what you need to think about, and then we give you options, and then we walk you through the trade-offs of those options. That way you can make better choices, because you're a unique person. You're on a unique team and a unique organization. So there is no such thing as a best practice, right? So where the frameworks, their pitch is that here are some best practices for solving a certain problem, and certainly they're good practices, but they might not be best for you because you might be in a different situation than what those practices are actually effective for, right? So our approach is to help you to understand, here's the situation that we're in. So instead of saying, here's the one official best practice to rule them all, we instead say, well, here's what you need to consider. here are some practices. So you choose the one that you do the best that you can in the situation that you face. So you need to choose the right approach for you. And then as your situation changes over time, as you learn and get better, then you might make different choices over time, and rightfully so. But it's not here's the one, so for example, in Scrum, you manage your work in the form of a product backlog. That's a great technique. There's 6 or 7 other different, very, very viable strategies for doing the same thing. Some of those strategies are generally better than a product backlog, and some of them are generally worse than a product backlog. But the Scrum folks only talk about product backlogs because that's the best practice, right? That's the one official way of doing things. No, it's observably not true. And then, and then the Kanban folks, they've got their way of managing work. And then of course you get all this headbutting of, my best practice can beat up your best practice. And it's like, grow up, who cares?
Exactly.
Like, choose the right strategy for you. And by the way, there's far more than just those 2 approaches too, right? So, so we don't go down that road that the frameworks do. We're all, DA is about helping you to improve and become a learning organization.
But that's a huge shift for PMI, right? PMI is all, or used to be, by the book. This is the PMBOK. This is the best way of doing things. So it's fundamentally, PMI has been on this, I think, transformation journey since probably 2010, 2012, when I'm talking about specifically Agile, but how is it, I'm interested to know, for PMI to actually acknowledge that there is no one best framework and that you have to contextualize things. It's a big, I think, switch, because maybe just to add to that, I think good and experienced project managers and know that you have to contextualize things. But I think the marketing message generally that came out of PMI is this is the best way. This is the PMBOK. This is when you take the exam. So what have you seen for the time that you've been with PMI? How's the mindset of people that are leading the PMI? Because it's a huge switch, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, one of the reasons why PMI purchased DA was because their mindset had shifted, right? They didn't buy us for the sheer, I am awesome and it's awesome to work with me. So observe, probably they bought us just because I'm so cool. But I suspect it's probably not, right? What had happened was the mindset had already shifted within the executive leadership, and it was becoming like, if you just look at the membership of PMI, there's a phenomenally wide range of stuff going on. From in the construction industry, obviously, but to the IT industry and software development, and then anything in between. So very wide range of projects and non-projects, regulatory and not regulatory, and others. So if you look at the 50th anniversary book from PMI, which listed the top 50 projects of all time, just those projects alone, just this huge range of stuff going on, and rightfully so, right? So one size does not fit all. So I think it's pretty obvious. Now, having said that, the term best practices is a phenomenal marketing term. It's what people want to hear. Just tell me the best practice, because there are a lot of people that just want to be told what to do. They might not admit it, but I don't want to be told what to do, but I would really like to hear about the 5 best practices to do this, right? It's like,
it's easy. It's easy thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Give me the recipe, right?
Yeah, give me the one recipe to feed me every meal for life. And it's like, really, because adults tend to have a different meal. You might only have 20 things you know how to cook, but still, you don't eat the one meal. You don't eat spaghetti every single night of your life, right?
Exactly. Or maybe so. This is a good segue into. I was listening to your podcast with Dave Pryor, who's a colleague of mine, and you described the grocery shopping analogy and the challenges that you're trying to solve with that. So could you maybe share that analogy, and then I want to build on that analogy a little bit. So.
Yeah, so basically, the analogy is one of, you need to have a meal, right? So say you want to have dinner tonight. So you'll go to the grocery store and you'll buy, the ingredients for that meal, or you'll go to your pantry and, pick them off the shelf if you've already gone shopping. But what'll happen is the meal that I'm going to cook tonight is different than the meal that you're going to cook. And the meal that I cook tomorrow night will be different than what I cook tonight as well, right? So I need to
Mhm.
be able to go to the grocery store, buy the ingredients I need to make the meals for my family, but I also need to have the skills. I need to know, what is a, what is mint, what is pasta, I need to
Mhm.
have a reasonable handle on these ingredients and the skills to cook my own meal, right? So this is where it becomes a bit challenging, because it's very easy, if I want to feed my family, I could take them to McDonald's tonight, right?
Exactly.
And here you go, Big Mac. And I could do that every night for the rest of their lives. And I suspect that wouldn't work out so well. So, but if I want to have a healthy meal, then I've got to at least, and I can't even change up restaurants, right? Like you can't eat at a restaurant every night. So you've got to have the skills to cook your own meal. And that implies you've got to also have the knowledge to pick the right ingredients in order to make those meals, and to experiment. And you'll experiment sometimes too, right? So it's a really wonderful metaphor for learning, because
Mhm.
I do a lot of the cooking in my family, and sometimes I experiment, and sometimes those experiments don't go so well. But I always learn something, and sometimes the experiments are awesome, but so often not. But anyways, but it's always, you always learn, and I've also learned to be a little bit humble, and I will read The Joy of Cooking every so often, and watch cooking shows and stuff like that to actually pick up skills from other people. But yeah, so it's a fairly decent metaphor. And I think I look at the frameworks as it's the big any given framework is like the Big Mac deal, or the
Mhm.
chicken bucket from Kentucky Fried Chicken or something, right? They're
Mhm.
feeding, they're solving a certain problem. They'll feed you a hamburger and French fries and a Coke for dinner, and that's the solution sometimes, but it's not always. So whereas we're teaching you how to cook in DA.
Ah. So to build on that, teaching to cook, I use the analogy, and I first described like the differences between, cook by the book, somebody that takes a recipe and just, one doesn't know much, like myself, unlike you, or maybe somebody else. I don't know what I'm doing, right? So
Yeah.
even when I try to follow recipe, it usually doesn't come out that great. Then there are, cooks with unique style, right? And I say like, these are the most dangerous cooks because they think they're chefs, and they try to do things. There are cooks with innovation. These are people that understand what they don't know, and they're inspiring to get better. And you have chefs that create recipes that understand like a chemical level, when you use parsley and
Mhm.
another ingredient, how they're going to interact at chemical level. So good chef knows that, right? So in agile community, we also have a lot of people. We have customers demanding recipes, yet we don't have all the ingredients. So I joke around. I spend a lot of time here in New England, so I joke around like how New England clam chowder has about the same amount of ingredients as Scrum. So if you don't have, we're doing daily stand-ups every other day. Our Scrum Master is our project manager and product owner, right? So instead of contextualizing things to their environment, we tend to blindly follow these recipes and frameworks. So now the challenge is, and I don't know from PMI's perspective, how do we get the full spectrum from cook by the book to chef? We need all of them, right?
Yeah.
But how do we get to that, and to that spectrum, and
So that's interesting, because we're actually, I would argue, in DA we're solving that problem,
Mhm.
because one of the things we've done in our certification program for DA is we've introduced cook, initial cook, follow the recipe,
Mhm.
type of cert, to master chef, we'll teach you how to cook, type of a
Yeah.
thing. So and it takes time, and we explicitly insist that you have experience, and if for some of the more senior certs, right? So it's not just
Mhm.
write us a check and you buy yourself a cert. Like, one of the great things about PMI is that we've always insisted that you earn your cert, and
Mhm.
that because it should be respectable and measurable and all that good sort of stuff. And actually, the DA, or the legacy DA organization, we adopted a lot of ideas from PMI on how to run a cert
Mhm.
program, and we always insisted that you had to earn your cert and show experience for the higher level ones. So the DA cert program, basically, we've got the Discipline Agile Scrum Master, which is basically intro to Agile, intro to Lean. You don't need any experience for that, but very good training. It's effectively Scrum Plus when it gets down to it. We cover a lot of stuff that they won't teach you in Scrum because they won't go into the technical practices. They don't want to give you any sort of skills to go beyond Scrum at all, right? Why would they?
Exactly.
And the Discipline Agile Senior Scrum Master basically teaches you how to improve. So where the Scrum Master teaches you how to improve at the personal and team level and be involved with team level improvement, the Senior Scrum Master teaches you how to lead it within a team and across teams. So it's really all about how do we help these teams learn and improve and get better. The Discipline Agile coach goes way beyond traditional Agile coaching, and it's all about answering the question, what do you do when you're coaching a team and then you have to interact with another team, like a disparate team? So say you're coaching a software team, but then you need to get funding for the team, right? We have to work with finance for that. And finance has a very different mindset, very different set of priorities, very different way of working. They might not be so agile at the present moment. And frankly, they're an impediment to you. From your point of view, they're an impediment. From their point of view, they're making sure you're not doing stupid things, right?
Exactly.
And they're effectively dealing with the children on the Agile teams, right? So it's two different mindsets there. So how do you get them to work together, and how do you get them improve and to agree on things, or how do you work with a procurement, or all three of those teams at once? Because you've got to go off and buy something, you get funding for it, and So, anyways, this is what we teach in Discipline Agile Coach. Like, how do we improve across these disparate teams and convince them to experiment with a collaborative way of working across these teams that is different from all of them? Like, the Agilists won't get everything they want, the finance people won't get everything they want, but they'll experiment with a potential new way of working and to prove it out in their situation. And then the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant is all about how do we improve across the value stream? How do we improve across the organization and optimize the whole? And that could be a collection of very disparate teams working together to bring products and services out to the customers. And that's a very complex set of skills, and that's mostly about lean and flow, and as opposed to agile. But at the same time, you've got to how do you what potential improvements do you have to, say, improve upon what you're currently doing with less, or what you're currently doing with safe? Like, how do you solve some of the common challenges in the safe world? How do you solve some of the common challenges that we see with traditional approaches, right? So the philosophy in DA is you start where you are. So if you're currently a safe shop or a less shop or Scrum shop, great, that's where you're starting. If you're a traditional shop, great, that's where you're starting. And then let's improve from there. Let's improve in small, safe steps, and over time, and become better. And
it's almost like Kanban, like evolutionary change type of stuff, where you are and work from there.
Exactly, yeah, and we also support faster change methods. We apply Brightline, so our transformation advice is is basically boils down to it depends, and because but that's the real transformation advice that you need.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Like, one size does not fit all. So some people want to tell you, well, just follow Cotter because follow these steps and it'll work. Well, that's a good approach in some situations, but if that's not the situation you're in, then it's not going to work. It's just not going to work, right?
Or you take a look at it, there's Cotter, there's AtCar, there's McKen, whatever. There's a lot of frameworks out there, and they do have general patterns, right? And I think when I started diving more and more into Discipline Agile, it's like the way that I understand Discipline Agile, it's collection of patterns and practices, and you're really just consulting with the client and saying, hey, here are some of the things, some of the options. I'm assuming you're still getting them to make the decisions, but essentially the toolkit is really to have some kind of baseline for discussion, and saying, rather than let's look at the ingredients that you have and let's cook something that you can, delicious with what you have, rather than blindly assuming that you're going to cook up something that that you don't have ingredients for.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? You start where you are, and and I think that's a really good analogy. So like, I live 45 minutes away from the nearest grocery store, so it is a decision for me to go grocery shopping. And so if I go to cook dinner tonight and I have it in my mind that I'm gonna cook chicken parmesan, and I go to the fridge and there's no chicken, I got a serious problem, right? So yeah, so what I really got to do is go to the cupboard. You say, well, what have I got? Oh, it's spaghetti night. Because that's what I'm down to, because I'm going shopping tomorrow. And so it is what it is, right? And that's the way you've got to look at it. And I think what happens is many people are, many organizations are looking for easy solutions because they want to get better. They want to, they want to become more effective. They want to become agile, whatever the story is. And they look for an easy solution. It's just tell me the recipe, right? And the frameworks will, here's a great recipe. But you know what? That's a great recipe, but it solves it solves a problem that this organization doesn't have. So
well, exactly, it doesn't solve any problems. If we look at last 20 years, and you've been around longer than that. Where has Agile, people confuse popularity with Agile and Scrum and in general the whole movement versus the success rate of solving the problems, and it's close to zero. And not many people talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's not. It has had some successes, but I think a couple of things have happened, right? So if you look at if you step back from that question and instead ask yourself, what organizations are succeeding? Well, I can find organizations that are very agile: Amazon, Google, eBay, all the ones that are doing very well during COVID right now, right? Because they were able to react and adapt to the environment. So the agile organizations have become phenomenally clear in the marketplace if you choose to look at them. So then ask you the question, well, how did Amazon get as good as they got? Well, it wasn't by adopting one of the frameworks. Sorry, it just wasn't. Let's do a reality check on this one. What it was they're a learning organization. They do the things that I was talking about earlier, where they make small changes over time. They run experiments. They figure out what works for them in their situation. They adopt what works. They abandon what doesn't work, and they improve over time, like basic Kaizen type of an approach. And because they've been doing it for so long and consistently doing it, that's why they've gotten as awesome as they are, right? So there are some organizations, and most of their techniques are very agile, very lean, very agile. Like if you actually look at the way they work, and they're still doing some traditional stuff. So it's all hybrid. So this is something that I think is absolutely critical. And I think one of the reasons why the Agile community has sort of struggled is because of their prejudices, and the purists have really taken the community for a ride. And so if you look at the successful, Agile enterprises out there, they're actually hybrid enterprises because they adopt strategies that make sense for them in their situation. And sometimes those are reasonably traditional ways of working. So it's exactly what we've been doing for years in DA. And what's interesting, if you remember like a year and a half ago, a lot of the purists, like these purist coaches, were telling us, we're advising everybody, you can't possibly be agile unless you're co-located, right? If you're trying to do remote agile, that's not really agile, and you're filthy. I wash my hands of you. I'm too good to interact with you because you're trying to do remote agile. Nobody is spinning that ignorant nonsense anymore. Nobody.
Well, because people don't fully understand. Like if you understand the underlying pattern, and it's about communication and collaboration. So if you can figure out to better communicate and collaborate, doesn't matter what physical is great at it, but it's not the only way. And I think that's
that's it, right? So it gets back to do the best that you can in the situation that you face. And and you've got to be flexible, right? So what was interesting was, when COVID hit, all these organizations had to scramble to go to remote working and put the infrastructure in place sometimes because people didn't have machines and whatever, let alone the ability to have a Zoom call and all those good sorts of things. So it was and then they had to learn, they had to invent techniques, because most of them didn't even understand that people have been doing this for many years and that these were solved problems, right? So the discipline agile organizations, they probably all of them were still doing remote already, but they just shifted techniques, right? Because we were already talking and sharing about it, because we were always open to remote work from the very beginning. We were open to large teams, remote work, and regulatory environments, and addressing architecture and technical practices and governance and many of these concepts, which are swear words for some of the purists, right? Or the advice from the purists gets down to, well, you're smart, you can figure it out on your own. Well, okay, yeah, you're smart, and yes, you could figure it on your own, but that's an incredibly expensive and slow way of doing things. when, you're dealing with known problem, you're dealing with problems that have known solutions, and often many known solutions. So why not leverage the learnings of others, right? So have a little bit of humility. And so this is what we teach you with the DA toolkit, is to leverage the learnings of others. So that way, when you go to experiment with a new technique, like a technique that's new for you, you can make a better choice with what you choose to experiment with, and thereby have a greater chance of success. And so then you end up improving faster, and you have fewer failures, which means, and more successes, fewer failures. So you end up improving faster and cheaper. So it's a very good thing. But it takes just a little bit of learning to pick up on this sort of stuff. But
the organization should have the desire to develop, cooks and chefs, right? Because we can't just go and say, hey, give us this recipe so we can all follow. And you've been, as I said, you've seen this probably many times. But you go to Deloitte, you go one of the bigger companies, they give you their playbook. They leave you with a big bill, and they're out.
Yeah.
And your people have no clue what to do with the playbooks and things that they left after.
And they won't even read them. It's a big assumption that people will follow and understand the recipe. It's just like you were saying, right? Like you'll read a recipe and you'll be going along and they'll say, well, fricassee, this is, what the heck is fricassee? Or you discover that you need a certain type of pan to really, get the heat right. And you don't have that pan. It's or anything close to it, right? So suddenly you're microwaving things when you really shouldn't be. But you're substituting hot dogs in for chicken because that's what you've got. That's
what happens in organization. The sad thing is, when I work as a coach with these organizations, inside of these organizations, so many people are hurt, so many people are suffering because of this, right? It's like you're almost poisoning people in a way, without either intentionally or unintentionally. But there's a lot of people, over the years, you just see the stress that people are going through. People getting people that have been in companies for 20-30 years feeling like shit, I don't feel like I'm worth anything, I'm replaceable. They just walked out, my peer that's worked here 20 years ago, they just walked him out to the front door, right? So when you start seeing things like that, you start realizing that this is much bigger, what that type of role it has and plays in people's personal lives. So but that's a separate topic. I want to come back to certifications and maybe give you a little bit of hard time. I have a couple of things that so if we look at I think Scrum Alliance, what Ken did with the Certified Scrum Master was, just copy PMI and certification, apply it to Scrum, in my opinion, and that has worked really well. And PMI has been kind of the gold standard when it comes to certifications. Now the PMI offers 5 certifications. So when I was looking at, there's still PMI ACP, and then we have 4 Discipline Agile certifications. So I kind of chuckled a little bit when I saw the Scrum Master and Advanced Scrum Master. And I know sometimes you have to go with the sales and what people are looking for and where the demand is versus the reality. So obviously, Discipline Agile is much bigger than Scrum. It's context driven, right? So could you talk about a little bit, what kind of discussions did you guys have when you talked about coming up with those 2 certifications, Scrum Master, Discipline Agile, Scrum Master, and Advanced Scrum Master?
Yeah, so we had a lot of heartburn for that one, so the reasoning was that we used to have something called Certified Discipline Agilist and Certified Discipline Agile Practitioner, and now those are relatively what Scrum Master and Senior Scrum Master are. So. And what happened though was, if you look, if you go to the LinkedIn and Indeed and anywhere where people are posting jobs, they're looking for Scrum Masters, they're looking for Senior Scrum Masters. It is what it is, right? It's just the hardcore reality of the marketplace. And so what we wanted to do was provide people with a career path. So where the ACP was great and still is great, it was sort of an add-on to the PMP, right? It's like, so you want to get some knowledge in Agile and Lean, and it's a great way to do it. Get a really solid basis in it, but it didn't really take you anywhere. So, whereas the Discipline Agile certs, there's a career path there. There's a learning path there, and it's a multi-year path, right? It's not just buy it type of thing. You've got to earn it. So I think there, so that's one of the big benefits for people, is that there's a very, very clear career path, and it's all about improving, helping you to learn how to improve. So we help you get better at getting better, and that is at different levels, right? So as you gain more experience, it's more viable for you to try to improve within your team or across teams or across the organization, and the certs and level of experience required and knowledge required reflects that sort of a path, learning and improvement path. So I think it's really coherent, and you're exactly right. It's about far more than just Scrum. So it's a bit unfortunate that we use the term Discipline Agile Scrum Master and Discipline Agile Senior Scrum Master for very good marketing purposes, but then it unfortunately doesn't easily describe just the wealth of material that you learn and how we go far beyond Scrum. And it's interesting. We'll have people that'll the company will have like an existing certified Scrum Master, and like I've literally taught workshops where at the very beginning, on the first day, the guy's sitting here like this, and I'm a certified Scrum Master, I know everything there is to know about Agile. And it's like, okay, yeah, right. And then by the end of the first day, the same person will be coming up to me and say, "Oh, this is like the most awesome course I've ever had. You're talking about issues that we've been struggling with for months, and not only do you solve them, you show several ways to solve them." And it's like, I never heard of any of this in the Scrum community. It's like, yeah, of course not, because they're teaching you Scrum, and it's great. Don't get me wrong, Scrum is great, but it's very limited. It's it's a 13-page. The Scrum guide is 13 pages of awesomeness, but it's only 13 pages. So hanging your hat on a 13-page body of knowledge, it's an interesting.
Yeah, and there are some, being part of both communities, right? Like, it gives me a little bit of kind of perspective on both ends. And I think there are some people that are part of Scrum Alliance community that have been advocating for, I don't know if you remember when Ron Jeffries and Chet and Agile Baker started like a Agile Atlas. And there's still in a way, like, there's a lot of, but I think the underlying thing, and what I like about Discipline Agile, is moving away from frameworks, right? Moving away from frameworks, contextualizing things, looking at patterns, practices. And I think just alone during the interviews that I've done over the last month or so, people that I respect in the industry, and when I ask them what's coming after this whole Agile and Agile to agility, everybody's saying we're moving towards context-driven patterns, practices, and contextualizing, and that's kind of what you're describing currently.
We've been
as
dealing with that for
Agile.
years now. So I would argue, so my experience is, the frameworks have a lot of value to add, and they're good starting points, right? So when you're first learning how to cook, learn how to follow a couple of recipes, right? Why not? And that's basically the way you get taught how to cook. But then start learning the techniques, and then start learning to, after a while, start learning to experiment. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Context counts, and it's good that the community is figuring that out. Okay, because anybody with any experience figures that out, right? And all the consultants will say, well, it depends. Well, yes, it does depend. Context counts. But in DA, one of our fundamental principles is context counts. And so we start from that very basis, because we took a very different approach. So I'll tell you a bit of history. So in the mid 2000s, I joined IBM, and I was there at IBM Rational. I was the chief methodologist for IT. And I led a group of people who, we were going out to customers and helping to understand Agile and Lean and applying at scale, in a phenomenally wide range of situations. And we started, and when I joined IBM, I was very clear. I had absolutely no intention of ever creating another framework or method, because I'd done several in the past, been there, done that, all the arrows in my back, had exactly zero interest in this based on, actual experience. So, but then after a couple of years, we started noticing things, and some things we noticed was that everybody was doing Agile differently. Nobody could really tell us what they were doing, right? Like they say, oh, well, we're a Scrum shop, which is meaningless, absolutely meaningless, right? It's like, yeah, you might be doing Scrum, but you're doing 50 other things and you haven't told me what they are. So you don't really know what you're doing. And sure enough, you go and you look at them, and then you go in and they're doing a little bit of Scrum, but they're doing Kanban over here and they're doing that over there and so on. But they're only focused on Scrum because they've been overwhelmed by the marketing. So fair enough, right? And everybody's struggling. That was the other thing too. Like everybody was struggling figuring out this Agile stuff to apply it in their own situation. So it was interesting. So we basically came to the conclusion that you needed that there was a need for advice. There was a need for some sort of what we believed to be a framework at the time to tell people how to actually do this Agile stuff in the real world, as opposed to what was being preached by the methodologists. But at the same time, everybody's doing it differently. So those were two phenomenally different observations. And I want to say that I would like to be able to say that we figured it out really quickly. We didn't. We thrashed for months on this, because it's like, it's black and it's white. What do we do? Right. And I was phenomenally reticent to get into the framework game. So, and rightfully so, right? So rightfully so. So then it was this, the ta-da, light bulb goes on, and we realized we really need a context-driven approach. And that's where Disciplined Agile delivery came from, which explained how do you do Agile solution delivery from beginning to end. How do you do projects and really how do you initiate things? So where some people still thrash on Sprint Zero, we just said explicitly, of course, you got to get going something. There's got to be some sort of initiation effort. It's come on, give me a break. And everybody was doing it, so let's just talk about it coherently and discuss to do it. So we developed that, and then we brought DevOps into play, and then IT, and then the rest of the organization. And that's how the Disciplined Agile toolkit evolved over time. So because we started realizing context counts in every part of the organization, and you need to be able to choose your own way of working in every part of the organization, and there's opportunity to improve in every part of the organization. And if you don't improve in every part of the organization, you've got a problem, right? So, if you view your organization as a complex adaptive system, and effectively like as a fleet of ships, right? Every team's a ship, you're a fleet, your organization's a fleet. Then if all these ships are going in different directions, then you're not really a fleet, right? Everybody's just a bunch of teams, it's just a bunch of teams doing their own thing. But if you're a fleet, you're basically going in the same direction. And wouldn't it be nice if you could actually work together and do whatever fleets do, and do it effectively and get better at it over time, right? Go take over other fleets, I guess. But so that's the idea there. And so context definitely, we need a contextualized approach. But here's the hard lesson for all my colleagues in the Agile community. I invite you to have the humility to recognize that other people have solved problems similar problems than what you're currently facing today. So instead of making stuff up, which is a lot of fun, you don't need to reinvent the wheel on everything. You really don't. So all this random experimentation, all this rhetoric around failing fast and all that sort of stuff, sure, it's better to fail fast than fail slowly, but it's still failure. And yes, you're learning something from the failures, but you know what? I don't need to be stupid about these experiments that we're running. And this is the problem with most of the coaches, is they're not being smart about these experiments. You don't need to experiment with the wrong thing, right? So if you know how to make choices, if you know that you've got several choices and you can identify the right choice, or a better choice, then you've got a much better chance of succeeding. So just be smart.
Well, it goes back to, I think, back to the analogy of cooks and chefs, right? Like it's almost like throwing stuff in and just blindly hoping that something delicious is gonna come out. Like you gotta understand like what you're throwing in, and when you're experimenting, you're basing it on your knowledge and previous experiences. Can you mix these two things, right? Yeah, exactly. If they just don't, there are certain things that just don't mix, right? Where a lot of times if you mix them, you might get poisoned or you might get an upset stomach. And I think probably that's what you're saying, like, you know, in a sense, like there are a lot of things out there that we know that we shouldn't mix, and there are things that we know that go well together. So just be more cognizant about what you're doing there.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, there is, and also be aware, just like that's the thing. Like, and so the Amazons of the world often run into issues that nobody else has actually solved. So then they're going to be they're going to be doing true experimentation. But if your organization is not at the Amazon level, and the vast majority of organizations are not, then it gets back to the humility. Just realize other people have figured out a lot of this stuff already. So why don't you leverage their learnings? Let's experiment with things that have a shot at working. And like, why fail? Like, it's yeah, and you'll fail every so often. Like, you're still going to make mistakes, and you'll burn the food, accidentally. But you don't need to experiment with silly things. And that I think is the big challenge that the community faces right now is first of all, understanding that the frameworks are only a good starting point, that you need to look beyond the frameworks. I find, so one of the things we've done in DA is we purposely don't use Scrum terminology, because, so just like, so if you remember Scrum, when they first came up with Scrum, they purposely chose silly terminology like sprint and Scrum and all these other things to send a very clear message to everybody that this is different. And that was a great decision. That's a wonderful marketing decision. It worked out really well for them. But so we're doing the same thing now. So we're using, older, more accurate terminology, and because we want to send a message to the Scrum community that there's a lot more to the world than just Scrum, and you need to wake up. So, we'll use the term iteration rather than sprint, and we get a lot of Scrum people. Oh my God, it's really a sprint. Why would you use that? Why would you use this made up term? Well, if you think that's a made up term, it's because you don't have a background in
exactly.
But also, it's like, we want you to think outside of the Scrum box, because Scrum in many ways has done a lot of great things, but it's really narrowed the conversation. And people really struggle to realize that there's stuff that happens outside of Scrum that is very good.
And I think, you just made me, I agree 100%. And you made me think of a couple of things. You made me think of extreme programming, right? And how, like, extreme programming, you can't do Scrum, or you can't really deliver without, extreme programming practice. It's very difficult, right? But Scrum is really good on marketing, or specifically, Ken really had a vision and understanding. I feel the same way for discipline Agile. Like, over the years, and like I think from content and like your message and the idea is spot on, but marketing wise, I think from the graphics, right, and people judge a lot of times. Oh, Safe has this nice polished thing, Less has, and I think people a lot of times, like I said at the beginning, they don't take a course with Scott or anybody else from the community. It's just basing it on a rough idea by skipping through a couple of pages and saying like, oh, this is a bunch of BS, right? So marketing is a big part. And I think that's something probably with Kanban, not as much, but definitely XP and Discipline Agile reminds me of that, where it's the message is right, but the marketing is not at the par where it needs to be. So I don't know if you agree with that, and like what?
Yeah, I do. Like, we're actively working on that very issue. It's easier said than done. One of the challenges is that DA there's some complexities. It's a complicated solution because we do complicated things. Like, this is the fundamental problem that in the industry right now is that, VUCA, right? It's getting more complex, rapidly changing, all this good sort of stuff, all this great uncertainty. And then we look for these absolutely simplistic answers, right? And, and it's crazy. And what happens is and we've been, and it's a Twitter world where everybody wants to read things in 280 bytes and stuff like that, right? They don't want to read books. They don't want to, any video that's longer than 5 minutes is pretty hard to get anybody to watch it these days. So they're looking for these absolutely simplistic answers for their exact problem. They want to be told. It gets back to, just give me the recipe, or better yet, give me the Big Mac deal. They just want the solution handed to them, and it's no, you've got to unfortunately learn how to cook. So, but you're right. We have struggled with marketing. The DA organization, we focused on content. We focused on actually dealing with helping organizations to do this and to teach people, and we didn't focus on marketing. So we got totally out marketed, and you're absolutely right. Like I would say the exact same thing of the XP guys. They completely got out marketed. It was strange. Like, in the late 90s, I was hanging out with the Kent Becks and the Ken Schwabers of the world and all these guys, and XP was very popular at the time because it spoke to people. But then they got out marketed by Scrum. Scrum was dead in the water, absolutely dead in the water when the Agile Manifesto was written. And it wasn't until Ken came along with a really great marketing strategy, the CSM strategy, that Scrum took off. Other than that, it was dead in the water, absolutely dead in the water. And XP was the thing. The early Agile conferences was the Extreme Programming Conference. It wasn't an Agile conference. It wasn't like until the third or fourth year that it became the Agile.
And now you go to conferences, there's no, it's getting a little bit better, but it's all about,
Well, the problem is XP is hard, right? You've got to be skilled, you've got to be skilled. And it's not, you can't just take a 2-day certification course and master it.
Right? So I'm talking to Chet after this one at 11:30. So it'll be interesting. As I said, I really enjoyed this. Maybe to switch topic a little bit, we have about 10 more minutes. So when it comes to the partners programs in training, like, through Scrum Alliance, we have CSTs and CCs. I was looking at, the traditional registered educational provider to PMI, and that was updated this year to authorized training partner program. And I was looking through it, and I was wondering, like, first of all, like, I was looking at the names, just people that were training, and maybe it's just me, but I didn't recognize a lot of people, like, so that could be a lot of them were PMI already trainers. Then I looked at the pricing too, and it's a lot more than what maybe, I don't know, it depends, like, when you look at it specifically from Scrum Alliance, but it's more than what maybe I paid through Scrum Alliance. So I was interested, and this just goes out to people that might be interested in becoming trainers. And I know Scrum Alliance has put a lot of effort in setting the bar for the similar program to authorized training partner. So I wanted to maybe just spend a couple of minutes and talk about, from your perspective, what is your vision specifically for the PMI authorized training program for discipline Agile practitioners, and how could somebody that's interested in becoming a partner, training partner, so maybe first, what was the reasoning behind it? What is your goal with that? And then how can somebody join that?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple things. So first, keep in mind that the ATP program, the Authorized Training Partner Program, is about more than just DA, right? So it's, there's organizations that train for PMP and, the ACP and different certs. So there's basically two concepts. There's you become an authorized, a company becomes an authorized training partner. And then they can have instructors to teach specific courses. So I could have an instructor that teaches PMP courses, for example. I could have an instructor that teaches, DASM and DASSM for whatever reason. So to become an instructor, you have to work for an ATP or be associated with. So you could be a consultant. You could be contracting through an ATP, for example. But you've got to be sponsored by an ATP to become an instructor. The second thing is you've got to be qualified to teach the workshop. So if you want to, for example, say you wanted to become a DASSM trainer, you have to have DASSM certification. You got to earn, you got to take the course before you teach it, type of thing. And so you get you've got to be qualified to be an instructor. So there's a training program for that. But you've got to be certified in what you're teaching. As well. So if you want to teach SSM, you got to be certified in SSM. Well, actually, for anything DA, the minimum now is you've got to at least be an SSM, because Senior Scrum Master, because that requires several years of experience. And to be a good instructor, you've got to be experienced in what you're teaching. So that's absolutely critical. And then becoming, if you teach the DAC, you got to be a DAC first, and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the way that I understand it now, you clarified it for me. So the partner is more like a company that can hire trainers to do that. So as a almost rep, you pay one fee and you can have 2-3 different trainers that are training under that license.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's exactly the way it is. So the training partner is allowed to offer workshops basically, and then they have qualified instructors to deliver the workshops. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because that's a little bit different than, and Scrum Alliance has reps that serve the similar role, but that was really helpful to clarify, because the price now makes more sense to me.
Yeah. So what we found is, with particularly with DA instructors, we've seen either existing ATPs hire instructors and they're also doing PMP and other things, or we've seen groups of instructors basically come together to form a company, or what they do is they work for an existing company, and they all decide to, hey, we're all going to get, this company becomes
chip in, a little bit,
chip in, stuff like that's going on. But it's got to be. What's also interesting about ATP is you have to be in business for at least 3 years. You've got to meet certain qualifications, so it's got to be a real company. So you can't just start a company tomorrow and then become
and just
it's not, it doesn't work that way. So you get so all the ATPs get and the instructors. They all have to be qualified, because our reputation's on the line. When it gets down.
No, that makes sense. So I was like trying to look at like, how does this discipline Agile deal with mindset and culture, and I ran across the discipline Agile mindset and the set of principles, promises, and guidelines. Could you please maybe just elaborate on that a little bit? Because I thought maybe that was from my understanding, the weakest spot, or something that maybe DA hasn't really evolved and developed. Because a lot of times we talk about the need to understand the psychology, and especially at the coach level, understanding the culture. And the more that I dug into it, the more that I saw, but it wasn't like right in front of me, kind of, so I think it exists. But I don't understand it. I haven't seen it. So could you maybe just talk about what is discipline Agile mindset, and how does DA deal with mindset and culture, or the softer side of Agile?
So in DA, there's an obvious focus on process, because we fill in the blank the frameworks don't want to deal with. So we believe in, you have to have the mindset, you have to know how to be Agile, but you also have to know how to do Agile. You have to have the skills as well, right? And it's still like 85% not mindset, but without the skills, the mindset doesn't really matter. And so originally we based the mindset on the Agile Manifesto. And very quickly, though, we realized that because our scope was bigger than software development, we realized that there was issues with the Agile Manifesto years before. So if you remember a couple months ago, in February, the 20th anniversary of the manifesto, there was a lot of sessions on, how do we extend, how do we rewrite the manifesto, right? We were there 10 years ago. And so what was happening, because it was blatantly obvious it needed to be done. But the manifesto authors didn't want to update the manifestos. There's a problem. So we weren't constrained by that. So we started working on something called the Discipline Agile Manifesto, which started addressing business agility, right? So as as the toolkit grew to have greater scope, we also evolved the mindset in parallel to reflect that. And then about 1.5 2 years ago, we started realizing that the Agile, the format of the manifesto, values and principles, was really clunky. It was great 20 years ago, but it just wasn't getting the job done. And so we stepped back and we asked the question, if we were to rewrite the manifesto today, how would we capture it? And it was a lot of effort, actually, but we came up with now what we call the DA mindset. And so it's based on a collection of principles, which we always had, right? So one of the weird things about the DA manifesto was we had a collection of high-level principles, then the reworked values from the Agile manifesto, and then reworked principles from the Agile manifesto. So we had 2 levels of principle. It was a total mess. So that was one of our motivators to rethink things. But we basically captured in this format of a collection of principles. We believe in these principles like context counts, and we want to optimize flow, and we want to be enterprise aware, so look beyond the team. Fundamental ideas, right? And those just pervade the toolkit. And because we believe in these principles, we make promises to ourselves and to others that we work with, that we collaborate with. So we believe in psychological safety, and we embrace diversity. We believe in making all work and workflow visible, and a bunch of other stuff. And it's mostly lean. That's the one interesting thing about the DA mindset is it's mostly lean. Be that as it may. And then in order to fulfill these promises, we follow guidelines. Like we take a validated learning approach. We change culture by changing the system. Like fundamental lean concepts. We always, we try to improve. One of the promises is we improve continuously. So this mindset pervades. I would argue pervades the toolkit. And if you go poking around on the site, we actually then, for the various process blades like marketing, for example, or finance or vendor management, we then extend the mindset with philosophies, because the marketing folks are in a different world, have different priorities than the finance folks and the IT folks, right? So there's different mindset, so we extend the mindset with philosophies that are specific to that process area within your organization. And sometimes there's some similarities between the philosophies, sometimes not, but often not. But it captures the fact that your marketing, and this is observable, right? This is very observable, that the marketing people in your company will have a different mindset than the finance people, right? So
it's like I think that's the case for everybody, because to some extent we're all been conditioned certain ways, right? So through company as well as outside. So I think that's one of going back to the underlying principle, like context matters, and you do have to understand that and meet people where they are, and then and all from there, because it's easy to say one size fits all, but and
that's even the same, and that's absolutely true of mindset. So I think that's an important observation. So where everybody will point at the Agile manifesto as that's the Agile mindset. Well, those are great ideas about software development that solved the issues 20 years ago, from a bunch of middle-aged white guys in North America. So
couple from Europe, but
for the most part, But it was actually I was on a panel with Kent Beck about a month ago, and somebody asked, what do you regret about the manifesto? And the very first thing out of his mouth was he regrets that it was a bunch of middle-aged white guys that wrote it. Fair enough. Fair enough. Not exactly the most diverse community, but different times. So the mindset pervades, but. I think we have for a long time had a focus on process, just because the rest of the community was just so weak on the process stuff and so focused and so strong on mindset that we filled in the blanks in DA that everybody was very weak, and still I would argue still is weak on. So I think that's the difference. But the mindset just pervades the toolkit. And approach. I think we're a lot more advanced than everybody else in the community, because we explicitly follow our own guidelines. We believe in context counts. And that means we have to respect the fact that different contexts mean different mindsets for people, and that's okay. There's some common.
I think exactly, and I think one of those things that you probably heard too is there are multiple truths, right? And that goes back to the mindset. So maybe as a last thing, what message or invitation do you have for Agile community, or anybody for that matter that wants to learn more about discipline Agile, maybe either has doubts or doesn't what would you like to say as we finish here?
Yeah, so I think give us the benefit of the doubt. Go and check out the site, pmi.org/DisciplinAgile, or just Google or Bing Discipline Agile. You'll find it fast enough, and just give us a bit of time, right? And I appreciate there's some density there, and we take on a lot of issues that maybe you don't appreciate, but if you just step back and ask yourself, is my organization dealing with these issues? I might not be, but is my organization dealing with these issues? And would it be nice to have some help? Then I think suddenly, your mind will open up. And yeah, we use different terminology, but that's on purpose, because we do want to send a message out loud and clear that this is different. But I think, if you can observe that people are unique and your team is unique, that context counts, then I think DA is something you should look at, particularly if you also have the humility to understand that you really are dealing with issues that other people probably solved, or they solve very similar problems. So I would invite you to learn from others first, right? Like, experiment wisely, and it'll be much better. It'll be much better for you. It'll be much better for your organization, and it's eye-opening. I think, like I said earlier, we run into all these agile experts, and then they first start learning DA, and pretty quickly they realize, wow, I really needed this a long time ago, because you're solving some really serious problems that we're struggling to deal with right now. And that is a phenomenally common experience. But they had to, they had to give it a day, a day of learning, or a few hours of learning sometimes, in order to just open up to, the idea that other people are dealing with these issues already.